Have you ever had that gut-deep panic when you realize your only exit is gone? When the escape you took for granted has been stolen, sealed, or sabotaged? That's exactly how I felt the moment I found a silk-clad neighbor named Deborah Harrington crouching in the shadows of my backyard at 2:04 a.m., plugging a thick orange extension cord into my outdoor outlet. That outlet wasn't just a tool, it was freedom. It powered my lawn tools, my workshop, my Sunday barbecue speakers, and once, even a generator during a 3-day storm outage. But that night, it became a symbol. A symbol of how quickly entitlement, privilege, and HOA power games can turn the safest place in your life into contested ground. I'm Ethan Bailey, 35, former Army Corps of Engineers, now electrical systems designer for a Seattle-based tech firm. I work remote. I keep to myself. And after a drawn-out divorce that ended more with tired silence than shattered plates, I bought a tidy 4-bedroom in Pinewood Estates, a picturesque suburban trap disguised as a community. The lawns were manicured with religious fervor, neighbors waved just enough to avoid conversation, and the HOA wore a polite smile while measuring your mailbox with a ruler. When I moved in, I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for peace, stability, a clean slate. And for a while, I got it. I'd wake up, make coffee, answer emails, knock out design schematics for smart commercial grid systems, and maybe end the day with a bit of Mario Kart with my best friend from the Army. The rhythm was repetitive, almost healing. Then came Deborah, a hurricane wrapped in Lululemon and layered entitlement. From the moment her Tesla Model X rolled into the driveway next door, with its paint so white it practically glowed under the streetlight, I should have known the balance was about to shift. The house she bought had sat on the market far too long. Word was the prior owners had fled due to a job opportunity. Now I suspect they just didn't want to share a fence with a woman who thought HOA bylaws were made for those people. You know, the ones who still shopped at Home Depot and didn't have a personal stylist for their dog. I met her the same way any decent Midwestern man raised by a mother who made pies for new neighbors would. I brought a basket, local IPA, organic chocolates, and a printout of the trash collection calendar. She opened the door with a smile that looked polished by a dentist and rehearsed by an acting coach. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said, her eyes scanning the gift like she was evaluating whether it would look cheap in her recycling bin. She wore cashmere, real thick cashmere, in 78-degree weather. Her leggings were the kind of designer activewear that had never met a yoga mat, and her jewelry jingled like a warning bell every time she gestured toward her newly remodeled foyer. "Italian marble," she said, laying a manicured hand across a kitchen island that could have hosted the Last Supper. 6-month waitlist. William insisted. He's a corporate attorney, very successful. She said very successful, the way some people say oxygen, as if it explained everything. And maybe it did. When she asked about my place, her gaze flicked across my modest porch and unpretentious siding like a judge at a dog show. "Oh, you're in that quaint little one-story?" Quaint. Like a gas station bathroom. When I told her I was an engineer, I saw it happen, the drop in interest, the subtle recalculation. I wasn't part of her social algorithm. Not worth computing. That interaction should have been my red flag, the blaring siren warning me to build a moat. But I brushed it off. I figured she'd keep her HOA ambition to herself, hold dinner parties I wouldn't be invited to, and stick to her own marble kingdom. I was wrong. Within weeks, she'd taken over the neighborhood. Her method? A tactical blend of passive aggression, $1,000 Chardonnay, and strategic donations to HOA board members with insecurity complexes. She became vice president of the HOA in just 6 weeks, displacing Dorothy, a retired elementary principal with 7 years of spotless service, who resigned abruptly citing family issues. I later found out Deborah had unearthed and leveraged Dorothy's son's DUI from 12 years ago. Chess, not checkers. At first, I ignored it. Let her have her wine-fueled soirees. I paid my dues, cut my lawn to regulation height, and kept my trash bins invisible. But then a bill arrived. Not just a bill, a financial slap in the face. My monthly power usage, normally hovering at $150, had ballooned to $450. I double-checked everything, ran diagnostics, used my power meter on every appliance. I even unplugged my damn coffee machine. Nothing explained it until my motion sensor camera alerted me to movement. 2:04 a.m. There she was. Pajamas that probably cost more than my bed, moving with the subtle grace of a well-practiced thief. She plugged into my outdoor outlet, ran the cord behind the shrubs, her idea approved by the HOA for aesthetics, and charged her electric ego with my electricity. Her Tesla sucked down 75 kilowatt hours every night like a metal vampire, and I was footing the bill. The next morning, I showed her the footage. Her smile didn't even twitch. "That could be anyone," she said, despite the 1080p footage of her face. "And honestly, if your electrical system is that fragile, maybe you should upgrade. Property values matter, Ethan." Then she hit me with it. "Your hedges are 2 inches over HOA regulation. As vice president, I'll have to flag that. She closed the door in my face like a judge slamming a gavel. That was the moment. Not the theft, not the lies, but the smug threat. That was when I realized, this wasn't just about electricity. This was about power, who had it, who abused it, and what someone like me, a guy with a garage full of tools and a military mind, was willing to do to take it back. She thought I was just some quiet engineer in a plain house with plain taste. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 6 years building infrastructure systems in active conflict zones. I knew how to trap a thief without ever laying a finger on them. And so, I began planning. But first, I documented, installed new cameras, started gathering usage data. And every night, I watched her, like a hawk observing a predator that thinks it's alone in the field. I wasn't stalking her. I was collecting intelligence. In combat, you don't charge blindly. You wait. You learn. Then you strike. And all the while, she kept smiling at HOA meetings, passing resolutions for landscaping upgrades, suggesting new rules that just happened to make my life harder. But she didn't know that every time she charged that car, she was walking deeper into the trap I was quietly designing. A trap not to harm, but to teach. To flip the cost of theft from my wallet back into hers. She thought I was quaint. She hadn't met the version of me who once wired an entire refugee hospital to run on unstable generators in 120-degree heat. She hadn't seen what I could build when someone cornered me. But she would. And when that trap finally closed, when the blink of a yellow LED would signal the beginning of her unraveling, it wouldn't be revenge. It would be education. The expensive kind. Ethan knew better than to confront the system unarmed. After his front door standoff with Deborah, after the dismissive smirk and that thinly veiled HOA threat disguised as a landscaping comment, he didn't retaliate with rage. He responded with research. That's what military engineers do when faced with sabotage. Reconnaissance first, retaliation later. He spent nights combing through county regulations, HOA bylaws buried deep in PDF files on outdated websites, and building code manuals more rigid than a military handbook. He wasn't just planning a counterattack. He was preparing to fight on their field, by their rules, and beat them anyway. But he wasn't prepared for how fast Deborah moved. Within 48 hours, a violation notice was delivered to his mailbox in a crisp envelope, typed in Comic Sans like some cruel joke. Unapproved modifications to exterior electrical infrastructure must be removed immediately, it read. The lockboxes he had placed over his outlets, simple plastic covers with padlocks, were now officially visual obstructions. Ethan almost laughed. Deborah hadn't even tried to hide the pettiness. Her fingerprints were all over it. The letter was signed by Gregory Palmer, the self-important HOA inspector whose clipboard seemed surgically attached to his left arm. Gregory was the kind of man who couldn't get through a conversation without quoting a regulation number and correcting your lawn height to the decimal. A man whose sense of control had evaporated when his middle management job disappeared during the 2008 crash, and who now found solace in micromanaging the curvature of mailbox posts. He arrived the next day in a khaki vest that looked like it came with a birdwatching kit and a bad-shaped HOA pin glinting on his chest. "Mr. Bailey," he said, puffing out his chest. "I'm here to ensure compliance with HOA Guideline 4.7.2 regarding unauthorized electrical alterations." Ethan didn't bother to explain. He simply walked outside, unlocked the boxes under Gregory's watchful gaze, and removed them with surgical precision. He caught the whiff of expensive cologne, familiar, Deborah's brand. Gregory's watch was new too, the kind that screamed, gifted by someone trying to buy loyalty. Ethan made a note. Deborah wasn't just stealing power, she was buying influence. Over the next week, small infractions began piling up. A notice for having his trash bin visible for more than 15 minutes after pickup. A warning that his mailbox was a half-inch too low. A complaint about his garage door needing aesthetic refresh, despite being freshly painted the year before. Deborah was weaponizing bureaucracy. But Ethan didn't flinch. He went to the next HOA meeting. For the first time, the community center's chairs were as uncomfortable as expected, folding metal relics that creaked with every movement. About 30 residents gathered, some bored, some angry, most quietly enduring the evening like a dental appointment. Deborah sat at the front table, flanked by Frank, the HOA president who always looked like he'd been pulled out of retirement at gunpoint, and Gregory, of course, who clutched his clipboard like a priest holding scripture. Ethan waited patiently until the floor opened for resident concerns. He stood, calm, prepared. "I'd like to address an ongoing issue involving unauthorized use of private electricity," he said, unfolding printed screenshots of his security footage. He didn't get to finish. "Point of order," Deborah interrupted, her voice smooth and coated in polite venom. "Personal disputes must be submitted in writing and are not appropriate for public meetings." Frank, clearly flustered, nodded in agreement. Yes, that's the procedure." Ethan's lips tightened. The trap hadn't been sprung, but the minefield was real. The meeting continued. Then came the twist, Frank shuffled his papers and announced the next agenda item: approval for the installation of electric vehicle charging stations in common areas. Ethan's eyes locked on Deborah, who stood like she was stepping onto a TED Talk stage, holding a glossy binder that practically sparkled. As we all know, green energy is the future, she began, losing self-importance. I propose we install 4 Level 2 EV charging stations near the community center to boost property values and demonstrate our environmental leadership. What she didn't say, but what Ethan immediately noticed, was that one of those stations would be placed just a few feet from her property, right along the shared fence line. After the meeting, Ethan stayed behind to inspect the proposal documents. Buried in the fine print was the real poison. The electricity used by the chargers would be billed to the HOA, the costs spread equally among all residents. In other words, Deborah had just figured out how to make her midnight Tesla snacks a community-funded buffet. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He ran calculations, cross-checked circuit load capacities, reviewed HOA energy budgets from the past year. The more he found, the worse it looked. He wasn't just being drained. The whole neighborhood was. So he started gathering data. He installed a professional-grade power monitoring device to his electrical panel, tracking usage patterns minute by minute. He created spreadsheets, color-coded heat maps, time-based analytics. And he wasn't alone. Through a series of quiet conversations and neighborly coffee chats, he found allies. Martha Wilson, a 68-year-old widow with a memory like a steel trap and a sarcasm streak honed from decades of HOA skirmishes, quickly became his confidant. That Harrington woman, Martha would mutter over tea. She's got half the board eating out of her hand like circus poodles. Martha had notes. Lots of them. She'd been documenting board behavior for years, including coincidences, like board members receiving gift baskets after voting certain ways. Brian and Sarah Thompson joined next, a young couple juggling kids, hospital shifts, and rising HOA fees. They weren't tech-savvy, but they were passionate and trustworthy. We're barely making it as is, Sarah confessed one evening as Tommy, their 8-year-old, zoomed toy cars across the porch. If the dues go up again, we'll have to pull him from his baseball league. It was a small confession, but it meant something, more than just bills. It was the cost of community trust, of fairness, and Deborah was gutting it for convenience. They collected signatures. 23 households signed a petition opposing any charging stations without individual metering. Martha filed a formal challenge, citing bylaws Deborah conveniently ignored. Brian created an anonymous newsletter detailing the misuse of HOA funds in plain language. And Ethan kept building his case. Every kilowatt Deborah stole. Every HOA rule she manipulated. Every neighbor she bullied with her weaponized charm. But the board played dirty. A week before the next vote, the meeting was mysteriously postponed due to projector issues. Deborah's car was spotted parked outside Frank's house that night. The timing was too convenient. Martha was livid. "They're stalling," she growled. "Buying time to get those votes back." That night, Ethan didn't just double-check his data, he made a decision. He realized Deborah wouldn't stop because she didn't recognize limits. She only responded to consequences. He didn't want war. He wasn't a man of conflict, but he was a man of precision, of systems. So he decided to build one. Not a trap, not sabotage, a solution. Something clean, something legal, something engineered. He knew exactly how much current Deborah's Tesla drew during off-peak charging. He knew exactly when she plugged in, between 1 and 4 a.m. every night. He also knew about protective power systems, industrial safeguards used in commercial buildings to prevent overloads and unauthorized use. Devices designed not to damage, but to protect, to log, to alert, to warn, and if ignored, to shut down. With that in mind, Ethan spent 3 days assembling the Smart Power Sentinel, SBS for short. It was discreet, elegant, weatherproof, and intelligent. It would monitor, record, and respond. Not with aggression, but with engineering. He printed a warning label, laminated it, and installed it next to the device, protected by SBS. Unauthorized usage may result in device damage. It glowed at night, LED backlit. Deborah would see it. She just wouldn't believe it. But when she did, she'd learn. Not from a fine. Not from a lecture. From the one language she couldn't ignore, consequences. Ethan didn't smile when he installed it. He didn't celebrate. He simply stood under the pale morning sky, watching the diagnostic LEDs blink their rhythmic sequence, confirming readiness. And he thought, "You picked the wrong outlet, Deborah. The wrong engineer. The wrong neighborhood." War wasn't declared, but a line was drawn. And soon, her Tesla would cross it. At precisely 1:03 a.m., the motion sensor pinged. Ethan, awake as usual, watched from his office window where the faint glow of his multiple monitors reflected in his glasses. He didn't flinch. He had predicted the time almost to the minute. There she was, Deborah Harrington, in silk pajamas patterned with some kind of pastel gold filigree, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun that probably took a stylist 30 minutes to make look natural. She moved with a smug confidence that came not from stealth, but from the assumption that no one would dare question her. That was her real weapon, not money, not HOA power, but the blind self-belief that rules existed only for other people. She approached the new outlet near the fence line, now part of the upgraded community EV charging project she had fast-tracked with the help of her HOA loyalists. The fake emergency declaration had allowed them to bypass community voting, labeling the new installation as a safety upgrade. Ethan had expanded his SBS, Smart Power Sentinel, system to monitor the new outlet. He didn't control the power to it, not directly, since it wasn't on his property. But that didn't matter. Monitoring usage, recording voltage patterns, and detecting anomalies? That was well within what he'd designed it for. What he hadn't expected, though, was the sheer arrogance with which Deborah now approached that outlet. She didn't even glance at the laminated warning tag he had placed discreetly near the base. It bore the same message: protected system. Misuse may result in power disruption. Authorized use only. But Deborah had already won in her mind. She bent down, plugged in the cord, pressed a few options on her Tesla's touchscreen, and walked away without even checking the connection. Her silhouette vanished into the dark like she had dropped a cigarette in someone else's yard and didn't care where it landed. The Tesla's onboard lights blinked softly, confirming the connection. The SBS came alive silently. Ethan's interface flashed, unauthorized usage detected. Abnormal load pattern. Initiating Tier 1 warning protocol. A yellow LED on the outlet began pulsing slowly. A soft beeping, barely audible, started repeating every 20 seconds. This was not sabotage. This was safety, industrial standard alerts designed for real-world applications. Systems like these were used in sensitive infrastructure environments, data centers, laboratories, even military field power units. But Deborah, in all her designer obliviousness, ignored it. Worse, she returned 10 minutes later. Ethan watched, almost disbelieving, as she stared at the blinking light with a puzzled frown, shrugged, then opened the Tesla app and increased the charge rate manually. She was forcing the car to bypass the default ramp-up behavior. Any EV engineer would tell you, this was reckless. Batteries weren't just storage units, they were chemical systems with tolerances and thresholds. Ignoring them wasn't just ignorant, it was dangerous. SBS interface flashed again. Tier 2 alert: sustained surge detected. Voltage oscillation engaged. The pulsing yellow LED turned solid. The beeping became a continuous tone for 6 seconds. One more tier before shutdown. Ethan hesitated. He could manually intervene, cut the warning cycle, delay the shutdown, but he didn't. This wasn't about punishment. This was about learning. Deborah had ignored every other sign: video footage, written notices, conversations, technical documentation. She had laughed in his face, smirked at meetings, manipulated finances, and whispered about his stability to neighbors. She believed she was untouchable. And now, the system would speak louder than he ever could. At 1:17 a.m., the Tesla's systems pulled a sudden spike, just over 80 amps, triggering the final threshold. SBS responded with precision, a short voltage fluctuation mimicking an industrial overload, followed by a clean shutdown. No sparks, no fire, no drama. Just silence. Then a flicker. Then, the Tesla's dashboard display went black. The faint hum of charging ceased. Deborah reappeared 3 minutes later, holding her phone. She looked at the car, tapped her screen, frowned, tapped again, then approached the vehicle. Her footsteps slowed when she noticed the absence of that familiar hum. She leaned closer to the driver's window. Nothing. The screen was blank. Not frozen, dead. She tried opening the door via the handle, but the system hadn't rebooted. The car had bricked. Ethan watched her spin in place like a malfunctioning Roomba, phone in hand, face pale in the porch light. She didn't scream. Not yet. But the fury was coming. He knew it. It came at 8:16 a.m., precisely the time most residents were leaving for work or sipping coffee in their robes by the front window. The pounding at Ethan's door was seismic. He opened it mid-knock. Deborah stood there, still in those now wrinkled pajamas, her face a kaleidoscope of rage, confusion, and desperation. "You did this," she hissed. "My Tesla is dead. Completely dead. The service tech says the battery management system is fried. That's a $22,000 repair. And the diagnostic says there was a surge. A voltage anomaly." "Good morning," Ethan said calmly, sipping his coffee. "You look well. I see the SBS system did its job." She looked like she might actually explode. "Your stupid little science project destroyed my car. It issued 3 warnings," Ethan said flatly. "Visible. Audible. Standard industrial-grade safety protocol. You ignored all of them. Increased the charge rate manually." He handed her a file, a printed copy of the system logs, photos of the warning sign, and legal documentation proving everything was up to electrical code. She grabbed it with trembling fingers. William is contacting our attorney, she snapped. This was malicious. Deliberate. Sabotage. I'd be happy to explain the system's design to your attorney, Ethan replied. Also, just so you're aware, I've documented all unauthorized usage, including video footage of your charging sessions dating back months. And your recent HOA invoices? I've traced the spike in community energy costs directly to your charging schedule. I'll be presenting all of it at the special HOA meeting next week. For the first time, she went quiet. Her rage dulled, replaced by something colder. Fear. Because she understood, this wasn't just about a car. This was a pattern. A documented theft. A misuse of position. A paper trail she couldn't charm her way out of. You think this is over? She whispered, eyes narrowing. I think, Ethan said, you're about to learn the difference between authority and accountability. 20 minutes later, a flatbed tow truck arrived to haul away her disabled Tesla. The driver looked vaguely amused, as if this wasn't his first high-end mistake. Ethan stood by his mailbox, holding a cup of black coffee, and nodding politely to the curious neighbors who peeked from behind curtains or walked their dogs suspiciously close to the drama. Deborah avoided his gaze, but she could feel it. The shift. She wasn't feared anymore. She was pitted. By noon, the service report came through. The Tesla's battery management system had sustained internal faulting due to improper charging behavior. The warranty did not cover damages caused by power surges triggered by user override. Estimated repair, $22,000. Out of pocket. That evening, Ethan received a notice in his mailbox. Another violation, this time for unauthorized signage near shared community space. He laughed. A dry, amused sound. He photocopied the violation, stapled it to a copy of the county electrical code that mandated safety signage, and submitted both to the board. By morning, Gregory Palmer had reluctantly rescinded the citation. He looked defeated. Sweaty. Quiet. Rumor was he'd stopped attending Deborah's wine nights. The real reckoning came at the following week's HOA meeting. But for now, Ethan stood in his garage, examining the SPS logs. Flawless performance. Clean shutdown. No illegal interference. Just engineering doing what it was designed to do, protect from misuse. In this case, protection had a price tag, and Deborah had finally paid hers. He looked toward the empty driveway next door, where the Tesla used to sit like a white gloss monument to privilege. Now it was just concrete. Still. Unplugged. And very, very quiet. The community clubhouse had never seen this many people. Folding chairs scraped against the polished floors as latecomers clustered near the back wall, whispering nervously, clutching printed flyers or clutching their spouses' arms like armor. The usual air of boredom that hung over Pinewood Estates' HOA meetings was gone, replaced by something sharp, electric. A reckoning. And at the center of it stood Ethan Bailey, not behind the microphone yet, not rushing. He moved with deliberate calm, laptop in one hand, a thick manila folder in the other. He had worn a black button-up shirt, not because he wanted to dress up, but because it didn't show sweat. Not that he was sweating. He had facts, data, video footage, and signatures from 2/3 of the residents. But this wasn't just a presentation. This was Judgment Day. Deborah Harrington sat near the front, legs crossed tightly, arms folded, lips a flat, furious line. She wore a designer blazer, so sharp it looked like it could cut glass. Her sunglasses, still on indoors, rested on her head like a crown she refused to surrender. William Harrington was notably absent, rumored to be overseas again, this time in Berlin on business. Most likely damage control from a PR disaster waiting to erupt. HOA President Frank, already red-faced and blinking too much, cleared his throat as he tapped the mic. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's great to see such enthusiastic community involvement. They got a few quiet snorts from the back. We'll be starting with a special presentation by, Mr. Bailey, who has requested time to address concerns regarding utility usage and recent events. Ethan stepped forward without looking at Deborah. He didn't need to. Her presence was loud, even in silence. He plugged in his laptop, opened a folder on the desktop labeled HOA Truth, and clicked play. The projector came to life. The first video was timestamped 2:04 a.m., from 2 months ago. Deborah, unmistakably her in silk robes, plugging her Tesla into Ethan's exterior outlet under cover of night. The silence in the room thickened. The next clip showed power usage logs, clearly highlighting the sharp spikes between 1 and 4 a.m. for weeks, exactly when Deborah had been stealing electricity. Ethan's voice was steady as he narrated. These recordings, paired with data from a professional-grade monitoring device installed on my home's circuit, show a consistent pattern of unauthorized energy usage, averaging 75 kilowatt-hours per night, equivalent to roughly $500 per month added to my bill. The theft spanned 3.5 months before I deployed a power protection system. He paused, clicked again. Footage rolled, showing the SBS warning lights blinking. The audio beeped softly. Then came the surge. Then the shutdown. Then Deborah, standing next to her brick Tesla, mouth open, face lit by the red error screen of her car. A few gasps echoed in the room. Ethan didn't smile. The system is industrial grade, legal, and certified. It issued 3 warnings. None were acknowledged. The Tesla's internal diagnostics confirmed damage due to improper charging behavior initiated by the user. Deborah shot to her feet. "This is a smear campaign," she snapped. "This man has been stalking me, manipulating data, and endangering community safety with some Frankenstein contraption. You mean the one that warned you 3 times before protecting itself?" Ethan asked calmly, not facing her. "Or the same type of system used in public institutions across the county. Fully documented here." He handed a packet to Frank. Deborah turned to the room, desperate. "He's been obsessed with me since I moved in. This is personal. He's manipulated footage. He's hacked systems. He's created this illusion to destroy my credibility because I didn't flirt back with his pathetic welcome basket." That got murmurs, sharp ones. Ethan opened the next file. "Let's talk money." A spreadsheet appeared on screen. Dates, numbers, names, HOA dues over time compared with charging data. Since the community EV outlets were installed near Mrs. Harrington's home, unauthorized peak hour charging has accounted for 62% of their usage. The costs, hidden in our HOA fees, have unfairly penalized other residents. This was pushed through by declaring it an emergency upgrade, bypassing community voting. That's a violation of our own bylaw, 2.3.7. Then came the petitions. Ethan handed them to the board, 23 homeowner signatures demanding oversight, individual metering, and a full audit of Deborah's decisions while in office. Brian Thompson stood from the middle row. "My family has had to cut our child's extracurriculars to afford these increases," he said. "And now we know we were paying for one person's Tesla?" "You said nothing, Deborah." Another voice chimed in, Martha Wilson, standing with a thick binder. "She didn't just stay silent. She orchestrated it. Here are internal HOA memos she forwarded to Gregory Palmer, the inspector, ordering him to issue citations to specific homes. Note the pattern. Every one of them had either raised concerns or voted against her in previous meetings." Gregory shrank in his seat. Deborah's face paled beneath her expensive foundation. "This is slander," she muttered. "Then you'll have no problem with a financial audit," Martha said crisply. "I move that we initiate an immediate vote to remove Deborah Harrington from the HOA board, request restitution for misappropriated energy funds, and hold a new election." The silence was momentary, then broken by a chorus of seconded motions. Frank, cornered, wiped his brow. "All in favor?" Hands shot up. Dozens. Some timid, some firm. Only 3 remained down, Deborah's and the 2 loyalists who never spoke. The motion passed. Deborah's reign ended with a vote, not a shout. But the damage had already spilled into every corner of the room. The anger wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. And people finally saw through the mirage. The aftermath moved fast. Deborah and William's house hit the market days later, listed well below their original purchase price. A quiet for sale sign replaced the ornate garden sculpture she'd insisted the HOA approve last fall. They left without a farewell, their departure marked only by Martha sitting on her lawn chair with a teacup raised in a slow, satisfied salute. Frank resigned shortly after, citing health issues, though everyone understood it was the stress of enabling Deborah's schemes. Gregory disappeared, avoiding eye contact in grocery stores, eventually replaced by a more neutral compliance officer. The board held new elections. Brian Thompson won by a landslide, pledging transparency, ethical oversight, and fairness. Ethan declined nominations. He had no interest in leading, but he agreed to be the technical advisor, helping install properly metered EV stations across the neighborhood. When the new stations were unveiled, they were clean, efficient, individually billed, and completely transparent. And they were busy, not just with Deborah gone, but because people trusted the system now. They knew it wasn't rigged, that their contributions mattered. Months later, Ethan sat on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun dip below the trees. The lot next door was quiet. A young couple had moved in, a pediatrician and her software engineer husband. Friendly, considerate, asked permission before building a fountain. The neighborhood healed. Slowly, earnestly, and somewhere deep inside the wiring of every outlet Ethan had helped design, there was a reminder. Integrity could be engineered. Justice could be automated, even if it took a voltage fluctuation to get there. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shift. Pinewood Estates, once a tightly wound suburb wrapped in passive-aggressive notices and cliquish HOA politics, began to breathe again. Not with loud celebrations or victory parades, but with quiet acts of decency. A wave between neighbors who had previously only exchanged stiff nods. An unsolicited helping hand lifting a dropped grocery bag. A shared laugh at the mailbox over Martha's latest garden scarecrow, which she had dressed in yoga pants and sunglasses in a not-so-subtle jab at the former queen of the HOA. Deborah Harrington's departure had left a crater, but it wasn't just an absence. It was a reset. The toxicity that had leaked into everything, from flowerbed regulations to budget meetings, had been scrubbed clean by exposure. It wasn't the Tesla, or the electricity theft, or the petty violations that had broken her spell. It was the truth. Documented, projected, undeniable truth. That changed things. Ethan noticed it first in the way people lingered when he walked past. Neighbors who had once looked through him now nodded respectfully or offered small acknowledgments. Brian and Sarah Thompson sent him a thank you note handwritten by their son Tommy, complete with a crayon drawing of a Tesla being zapped by a lightning bolt labeled Justice Machine. Sarah invited him to dinner twice, which he politely declined, but he appreciated the warmth behind it. He had not set out to be a hero, but he had set out to stop something wrong, and people had finally noticed. The new HOA board, under Brian's steady leadership, moved quickly to implement real reform. One of their first acts was full transparency of financials. Every resident now received a monthly email outlining exactly how HOA fees were allocated, down to the last dollar. Landscaping, maintenance, utilities, even board stipends. Everything visible, everything accountable. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Trust, once fractured, began to rebuild. The charging stations were Ethan's project. Not because he needed them, but because he wanted them done right. He designed a small network of stations with individual metering. No shared billing, no vague community use calculations. The system included user authentication, time of use restrictions to avoid peak surcharges, and solar panel integration with a real-time feedback app. It wasn't just smarter. It was honest. And it became a symbol. 3 more residents bought EVs within 2 months. One of them, a retired biology teacher named Lena, told Ethan she had always wanted one but couldn't justify the cost without fair charging access. Now she could, and did. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. Deborah had wanted to showcase herself as the face of green progress. In the end, her greed had made room for real progress to bloom. Martha, in her own way, remained a quiet sentinel. She started a community garden in a neglected plot of the common area, once the proposed site of Deborah's so-called community lounge. Now it grew tomatoes, basil, sunflowers, and pride. Families took turns tending the rows. Children painted signs. Even the grumpiest neighbor on the block, Mr. Callahan, contributed a compost barrel. Ethan visited sometimes, not to garden but to talk. With Martha, with Sarah, with the Thompsons. He didn't offer advice unless asked. He didn't need the spotlight. What he needed was peace. And slowly it returned. One weekend in early autumn, as leaves rustled against concrete, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon from someone's open kitchen window, the last trace of the Harringtons was erased. A moving truck arrived to collect the final pieces of furniture left behind in their rushed exit. The new homeowners, a couple in their 30s, brought with them a cautious optimism. They introduced themselves properly: Melissa, a pediatric oncologist, and Aaron, a game designer. They didn't brag. They asked questions. They brought over homemade cookies as a gesture, and even asked Ethan for his opinion before installing a small koi pond, which would have previously been rejected for exceeding water feature regulations. The board approved it unanimously. At night, Ethan would sometimes sit on his porch, a glass of scotch in hand, listening to the soft gurgle of the pond's filter across the fence. It was peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. And when he glanced at the corner of the community lot where Deborah used to sneak her charging cord across the hedge, he saw something poetic: one of the new EV stations. Properly marked. Metered. Quietly humming as it served the neighborhood, not just one person's entitlement. One day, while reviewing system logs out of habit more than necessity, Ethan noticed something odd. A sharp spike at 2 a.m. A device drawing power at full throttle without the gradual ramp-up. His heart raced, not out of fear but instinct. He checked the camera feed. Nothing suspicious, just one of the new users forgetting to configure their default settings. He sent a polite email with screenshots, explaining how to avoid overloading the system. They responded with gratitude. Not excuses. Not threats. Just thanks. That was the difference. That was the win. Ethan never did join the HOA board. He had no patience for meetings about mulch color or fence heights. But he remained the community's technical advisor, unofficially at first, then formally invited by the board. He agreed on one condition: no bureaucracy. Just solutions. They honored that. He helped modernize the neighborhood's entire infrastructure: automated lighting for walkways, motion-activated security near mailboxes, better insulation recommendations for homes built before 2000. Small things, but they mattered. One evening, as he was walking back from a system check at one of the southern outlets, Martha flagged him down. She handed him a small, neatly wrapped box. "Just open it at home," she said, then walked away without waiting for questions. He did. Inside was a handcrafted plaque, "To Ethan Bailey for reminding us that power, real power, isn't about control. It's about responsibility." He didn't hang it on his wall. He didn't need to. He remembered it. Every time he walked past the garden. Every time a neighbor nodded with respect. Every time he passed the spot where Deborah's Tesla once gleamed like a shrine. Now it was just another patch of asphalt, serving a greater purpose. Justice hadn't come in a grand speech or a courtroom verdict. It had arrived through blinking lights, protective protocols, and a man who decided that being quiet didn't mean being passive. In the end, Ethan didn't teach Deborah a lesson. He taught a community to stop being afraid. And that was more lasting than any battery, any lawsuit, or any vote. It was a voltage they could all feel, steady, clean, and finally theirs.